So, Dave Lee, thanks for joining us. You are the author of several books on chaos magic and magic, and we're going to look at primordial chaos in particular, and a little bit in your life, which is pretty fascinating. You've been a member of the Illuminates of Thanateros since the 1980s, which probably no one else can boast, I'm sure. So, do you want to just give us a little bit of your background, how you got into magic, who you are, your books, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. I I came across Lieber Null about within a year of it being published, 78, 79. The original white edition, which has now been
Mm,
erased from history. There was only about 50 copies, apparently. I bought it in a
wow.
second-hand shop. And Chris Bray of The Sorcerer's Apprentice in Leeds was pushing it as the thing. This is the state of the current now. And so there was a lot of interest in it. And when I got a copy and read it, I thought, oh, this is definitely for me. It's for recovering science kids, acid head science kids, who sort of like got total science background and could therefore not engage with a lot of magic because it required a religious or quasi mystical sort of approach like Crowley's stuff does, even though it's
Mm,
interesting.
mm,
So all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is, pragmatic and kind of like science like. This is my kind of magic. And at the time, I was living in Leeds doing a post grad at the university, and I would go in the Sorcerer's Apprentice shop there when it's a mail order thing, for a long, long time now. At the time, it was an actual shop. You'd go in there, there's all this wonderful smell of incenses and lots of really interesting books I'd never come across before. And Chris Bray, who's sort of a businessman, but he was very keen on what he did, and a sort of infectious enthusiasm. And he started opening up a kind of coffee morning on the Saturdays. And I was living in a house which was, like a 10-minute walk away. So we would all get down there and hang out and drink instant coffee. And that's when I met Ray Sherwin. And he was hospitable at the time, and a few of us went up to his place. And eventually it came to Oh, and then Pete Carroll came back to the country and ended up renting a place in the same village that Rose Sherwin was living in, East Morton, near Bradford, West
mm.
Yorkshire. And it came to a point of let's form a group. So that myself and a few friends and Ray and Pete formed the first group, which wasn't the so-called Circle of Chaos. That was later. This was in 1980, started in November 1980, and ran for about 18 months. And so that was the first ever IoT group, basically.
Um,
So I
um,
was a founder member of that.
yeah, and was it called the IoT at the time, or did it have a different name?
Yeah, the IoT was a concept that Pete came up with before the concept of chaos magic and before he'd published Liber Null,
Yeah.
because in Ray Sherwin's magazine, The New Equinox, there was an announcement of this new magical order, the Illuminates of
Yeah.
Thanateros, and the sorceries of Tao and Zos and all of this all sounded very romantic, and that was the first announcement of it. And I think that came out before that advert came out, before the book Liber Null came out. So it was all kind of conceived at the same time. So yeah, but the IoT, if you look at the early editions of Libre, it's all sort of like this is third degree IoT, blah blah
Yeah.
blah, so
Yeah.
many degree this, degree that, and there were no degrees at all until the Pact, which was
Right.
10 years later.
Yeah, 1986, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there you are in Yorkshire practicing early chaos magic with Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin. And so how did that develop, or how did you develop in that world?
It was all very exciting. I felt like
Yeah.
I was. I don't know if you've ever seen a cartoon by Robert Anton Wilson in one of his Cosmic Trigger books, where
Mm,
it's got this kind of like white coated, lab coated scientist, and standing in sort of split frame beside him is this stoned looking hippie character. And the caption was, "Hey man, are you only using half your brain?" And the message being quite obvious, and I thought, oh, this is it. This is the magic for acid head science kids, and so it was all very exciting. It's like we were living in some idea that had been created by Wilson just a few years before.
Yeah.
Um, that was the first group, and then Pete Carroll went away, and that group ended. We seemed to, we didn't, in some ways, we didn't really know what to do in certain sense. We developed a few things. We didn't have like the Chaos Mass B that Pete wrote. We'd use
Right.
something like the Bornless one, or
Right.
the Endless one, depending on what you want to call it,
Yeah.
as our consciousness raising working. And we would perform initiations, but it was anyway the whole thing. It was we weren't really quite sure a lot of the time what we were doing in the working, and there was a sense that it was all heavily over masculine. So we decided to dissolve the group in 1982. Excuse me, about May '82, and Berry did a final ritual invoking four goddesses. That ritual I wrote, and buried a copper pantacle in the site we'd been using to let the IoT kind of go to sleep for a while until it could awaken
Mm.
refreshed. And about nearly 2 years after that, Ray Sherwin started collecting another group together, and that's the group that became known as the Circle of Chaos, because it was an experiment in ostensibly non-hierarchical group forms. I say
Right.
ostensibly because it's my belief that in any group you've either got covert hierarchy or overt hierarchy.
For sure.
The person
Yeah.
who's the most articulate or the loudest voice will tend to sort of like have
Yeah.
the most say. So sometimes hierarchy, if there are plenty of checks and balances built in,
Hmm.
is actually
Yeah.
fairer to the
Yeah.
quieter members than
Yeah.
so-called non-hierarchy. Anyway, we tried that experiment. That group ran for 3 years, I think, um, and it was very good. We did a lot of workings. There was a core group of 8 of us, although I think we had up to 12 or 13 for some workings. So it was a very successful group basically. We started getting more of an idea of what we were doing, what to enchant for. Group initiation for a start. That was something that Ray Sherwin came up with, which was quite a nice idea. The idea
Mm.
that you were initiated not on some ladder of hierarchy, but into functionality in the group, and so like a kind of trust process,
Right.
and that, and we also did a few sort of enchantment. There was one particularly impressive enchantment which I've written about a little bit. I think there's a little bit about it in um, Primordial Chaos, but there's certainly going to be a lot more about it in my memoirs. That we created an egregore entity, and that was a really powerful working. At the time, I'd never been involved in such a powerful working. That was about '85, probably about a year into the group's existence. Um, we all brought along. We all had to make clothes for it. I made a pair of trousers and a little waistcoat, and we had to come along with a poem or an invocation or a song, so that there was something of our heart, something of our soul, and something of our very physicality in this. And Len, Ray Sherman's wife, Marlena, she was a really talented artist, and she took the image that had been on the covers of the early Liber Knolls, the sort of Tiamat type
Yeah.
androgynous monster,
Mm.
and made it more feminine. So it was all masculine and feminine, and
Mm.
did it as a sculpture, which is maybe
Oh,
about
wow.
this big,
Yeah.
a three-dimensional thing. And it was magnificent. It was
Yeah.
really beautiful. And she covered it in this sort of silver glaze, which in candlelight made it look like it was radiating gold. And the sacrament was, if you wanted it, was LSD, and for that night. And so it was like a really intense working,
Yeah.
and people were in tears with the intensity of it. It was just amazing. And that entity became phenomenally powerful. It did so many good things. But of course, when you do anything that powerful, you kind of get stuck in a bit of a rut with it. It's like, oh, let's use. It was called Masmoneth, and we all swore never to reveal that name. And then a couple of decades ago, 15 years ago maybe, Ray Sherwin started talking about it online. He broke that oath deliberately.
Mm. Mm.
he always said that the only way he was quoted as saying this to one of the other group members. The only point in making an oath is so you can break it, which I think is
Wow.
tells you more about Ray Sherwin than it does about magic. But
Yeah.
anyway, enough of that. He's not with us anymore. But yeah, he broke that oath, so none of us were bound by it any longer, obviously. So that
Yeah.
entity, Masmoneth, that became the prime focus of the group, which was good for a while. And then it became kind of too much. It's like you're relying on that for everything, just wanting to make it more and more powerful.
Right.
And I think it created the tensions within the group that eventually split the group up a couple of
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah. And Masmoneth was the egregore that you had created.
Yeah,
Mm. Mhm.
it's my
Yeah.
first experience of an egregore entity. It's
Right.
an aspect of magical working that I think is
Yeah.
vastly underrated.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then when did you officially join the IoT? Or would you say that you were already officially in the IoT, even though it's a little bit maybe more
Oh,
less
yeah.
structured?
Anybody who walked through the door and took part in a ritual was in the IoT. So from that first group in
Yeah.
November 1980, we were all in the IoT. That
I
was how it
see.
was understood.
Yeah.
And the grades thing in in the frontispiece of Liber Null, the
Yeah.
first pages of Liber Null, was not considered to be a serious thing. It's only later with the Pact in '86 that Pete decided it was worth taking that idea seriously.
Right. Right. I see. Yeah. And I joined in 1990 and left around the middle, or maybe slightly before the middle of 1991. So yeah, so that was definitely a part of it then for sure. Yeah.
So you left just as I was rejoining because
Yeah.
I'd been away after that group broke up. I thought, right, I'm going to go and explore because I could see that things had got stuck in a rut. So I was going to go and explore other magics. I worked a bit with Gnostic Voodoo. I worked a bit with some sort of like Crowley type materials for a few years. Excuse me. And then in 1991, Pete Carroll rang me up one day and said, fancy coming to the world meeting in Austria, the IoT world meeting. And I was saying, yeah, sure, yeah, why not? I thought, a new adventure. Let's start again from a different angle.
Yeah.
So myself and my partner at the time went over to Burg Lockenhaus, this medieval
Right.
castle on near the Hungarian border, and magnificent place. And had a week, more than a week, because the public seminars were about 4 or 5 days, and then there was most of a week of meetings. So it was a really long meeting, and it was just absolutely intense and wonderful. And came
Mm.
back to Leeds, late night, in summer '91, thinking, right, I want more of this. We're going to form a temple, and we did. And so I was, wholeheartedly embraced the pact of the IoT at that point.
Right. Right. Yeah. And since then you've become a member of the Rune Guild as well. I know because you have it in Primordial Chaos. Or at least you have a lot about runes in there later in the book.
Mm.
So how does that work with chaos magic or not work, or why did that happen, or
Well, I mean, I think it's true to say that if you're looking at an organisation from the outside, you're not a member of it, then you tend to sort of look at its presented ideology or whatever, its presented magical style,
Mhm.
but you don't necessarily think of joining it until you meet some people who are in it and are sufficiently impressed by them.
Right.
And so that's what happened when I knew Ian Reed and
Mhm.
Ingrid
Mhm.
Fisher through the IoT. Ingrid Fisher was the first degree, Magus grade, who's a woman in the IoT,
Yeah.
and she took over the running of the British Isles section sometime after Pete Carroll kind of pulled back, withdrew from administrative duties in '91, and yeah, so I was impressed by them too. Got to know them through that scene, through the IoT, but then realised they were also members of the Rune Guild. And my own collision with the Northern Mysteries was basically in 1995. I'd been doing a series of workings to gain knowledge and conversation of my holy guardian angel in that sort of old-fashioned
Hmm.
terminology. I'd done a few months of intensive workings. And this was to culminate in a pilgrimage where I walked over 40 miles over 4 days from Streatley to Avebury along the Ridgeway, one of the most ancient tracks in England, in southern England. And I was just on my own, sort of wild camping and stuff, just a sort of whole idea being it's a sort of initiatory process. And I got to Avebury around the midsummer and took some acid and had a vision of my holy guardian angel. And it was all like, wow, the whole thing's kind of working. This is amazing. And then after I sort of came down from that experience and got back, went back to Leeds, went back to work, I realised that all, that whole current had dissolved for me. It was as if my angel was saying, right, okay, you've done all that stuff now, all that sort of like, Western esoteric tradition stuff. Now it's time for something new. So I'm going to shut everything down for a bit. So I went to visit this, well, a sort of on-off girlfriend who was living in Glastonbury, and I heard that Edred Thorson of the Rune Guild was going to be over in England and giving a talk in Charlton House in South London. So I drove up from the southwest up to London for the talk, and I kind of arrived just in time. It had been difficult conditions and driving, and so I was in a real rush. So I kind of like parked my car up in Charlton House car park, rushed into the talk, just got there in time for the beginning of it, and I was really impressed. I thought, runes is one thing. The kind of initiatic magic that I was aiming at was another, maybe. But the way Thorson presented it, I thought, they intersect. They intersect in the Rune Guild and in Thorson's interpretation of the Germanic mysteries.
Mm.
So something clicked for me that day. And I was impressed, and I thought, right, I'm going to look into the Rune Guild much more, even though I know that there's some cool people in it, like Ian and Ingrid. I'm going to look into
Right.
it. So I went, I was kind of like, a couple of us from the IoT were sort of swept up in the kind of after party, which consisted of taking Edred to one of our members' house in rural Essex, a beautiful country, small country house with a big bit of land by it, and an outdoor ritual was performed, and I recited a bit of memorized poetry to my own contribution. It was all kind of like very open ended, but it was a nice group of
Hmm.
people. I loved the magical energy that was around, so that
Mm.
was good. And anyway, yeah, to switch back to Charlton House, I came out ready to go to drive over to Essex for this party, and I my car had been broken into. One of the little side windows, little side lights had been smashed, and someone had unlocked the door and taken this bag that I hadn't removed from the back seat. My sort of just basic overnight travel bag was in there, and if I'd have had more time, I'd have stuck it in the boot so as not to generate temptation for thieves. You don't leave something
Yeah.
sitting in the back seat of a car
Yeah.
in some public place which is actually shielded from public view.
Mm.
And oh no, someone's broken in the car and the bag's gone. What was in that bag, apart from a change of underwear, was some goetic sigils, a Solomonic pantacle, and a Solomonic wand that I'd been using for some of the initiatic work I'd been doing as a build-up to the Holy Guardian Angel work. So whoever nicked that, all they got, apart from a change of underwear, was a kit for doing the magical system that I'd just walked out of.
Mm.
So or rather, my holy guardian angel had just shooed me out of. So I took that to mean that, okay, ahead with the runes. So I joined the Rune Guild the January of the following year, 96.
Yeah. And you've written a few books, of course, and the Primordial Chaos goes across, I guess, over several decades from early-ish chaos magic through the runes. So where would you say you are now in terms of your belief or practice, or how has it changed over the years?
Ooh. It's always hard to evaluate where you are now
It
in some ways,
is.
isn't it? It's always
It
so easier
is.
to evaluate where you were back
Yeah.
then. I'm still. I still work with the IoT.
Yeah,
I'm called an elder in that community,
very
which
good.
basically means that I've been through all the administrative stuff, so that I was, I took second degree, became the section head of the British Isles section, became a first degree, and then so I was international representative of the British Isles section, and then when I'd had enough of that and wanted to pass that, that baton on to someone else, I took elder, which means that I can still be around and interfere as much as I want, but I'm not obliged to have to do administrative work anymore. That's what an elder is. So I see the role of the elder as someone who tells stories,
Hmm.
basically, as someone who generates and keeps alive the
Yeah,
cultural continuity of the organisation.
right.
So that's how I see my role in the IoT.
Yeah. Well, that links to your upcoming memoir as well, right?
Very much so, yeah. I'm telling stories. I'm telling stories that generate as vivid an impression as I can of the current that I've been embedded in and the community that's generated that current.
Yeah,
So it's there for future people to look at.
right.
And something vaguely similar kind of happened with the Rune Guild as well, because the hall of the Rune Guild that I'm in, Irminsul Hall, was founded in 1994, April 1994. We had a 30-year celebration in the city of York in April 2024, just a couple of years ago. Um, it's the longest running hall of the Rune Guild anywhere in the world,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was founded by Ian and Ingrid. Ian ran it as leader for a while, then Ingrid took over, and Ingrid was leader for a very long time. And then with her death in 2020, they decided to pass on, to offer the
Yeah,
leadership of the hall to me. So I've been leader of the hall since. So again, I'm someone who's, been part of a cultural continuity there.
yeah. And so what does leadership mean in the context of the Room Guild or the IoT or any magical organization, do you think?
Well, I think in the Rune Guild, it's kind of simpler. It just means that you're the administrative head. It's up to you to organise people, to organise meetings,
Yeah,
to inform people of future meetings, and to to really sort of lead the day-to-day running of the hall.
mm,
The IoT, it's slightly more complex because you're expected to kind of contribute to the public-facing elements of what we do as well. So, giving talks, writing books. Not everybody does that, and you're not looked down on if you don't. But
right.
if you've reached a position of second or first degree in the IoT, it's likely that you'll also be doing the occasional talk, and maybe if it's your kind of thing, writing a book or writing articles, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, yeah,
you're not only helping organise the organisation internally, you're also helping to promote its goals in the world.
right. Right, yeah. And how do you feel about chaos magic today or how it's presented and it's sort of I'm not saying it's necessarily changed, but it's certainly, it's attracted younger people and you see it in graphic novels and sort of edgy
Yeah, yeah.
music and things like that. So
We have Grant Morrison to thank for that, of course, don't we?
yeah, that's
Invisible as
right.
well, which
Partly,
is
yeah.
so explicitly chaos-like in so many
Yeah,
ways. Yeah, no, it's lovely. I met Grant, really likable chap, very very nice guy. And other people, of course, don't like the IoT or chaos magic, and so they created narratives where we finished in the 90s.
right.
There was one ex-member who's particularly seems to be rather envious of what's happened since he left. To sort of like keeps saying, "Oh, it's not really existed since the mid 90s," and
Right.
things like that. And academics sometimes say that. So, there's a whole kind of academic industry around modern magical history now,
Yes, that's
which is,
right.
in some ways a good thing. I'm glad that people have noticed our stuff, but in other ways, which I may go into, it's not such a good thing. And in one way, it means that there's the danger that, what academics are like. They tend to sort of like take a position, and their whole
Hmm.
career at that
Yeah.
stage relies on defending that position.
Yes, that's
So
right.
there are academics out there who absolutely believe that, the IoT or chaos magic finished in 1997 or something, and and they're not very permeable to any discussion of that position.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of lies about the IoT and chaos magic out there. We became, I suppose, back in the day, you learned about magical orders and meetings through bill posters in shops,
Yes, that's
in
right. Yeah.
occult shops and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
there was a bit of a mail network as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
People would write to each other and
Yes.
disseminate information that way. Then the internet came along, and that simply kind of like enhanced that aspect of things for quite a while until social media came along. Then all of a sudden, you had to have social media presence, or you weren't regarded as existing at all.
Yeah.
We started to realize that was happening about 15 or so years ago, maybe a bit longer in the IoT, that people kept, oh, does the IoT still exist? And
Yeah.
yeah, it does actually. It's just as active as it ever was. But, we realized we had to have some sort of presence on Facebook and so forth. So we started doing that. And there was something, there was a real build up of interest of younger people
Yeah.
who'd not grown up in the era of bookshops and leaflets,
Yeah.
but were growing up in the era of social media. And then with the lockdowns during the pandemic,
Right.
2020, 2021,
Yeah.
there was an amazing surge of interest. It's just really bizarre because like we started experimenting with doing rituals online, and I would preface the rest of what I'm going to say with saying that it's never going to be as good as being in the same room. Being in the
Right.
same
Definitely.
room as people has an energy that you cannot replicate online.
Yeah.
However, you can replicate a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, if you try, you can replicate a good deal of it. And it's certainly an online meeting, a Zoom based meeting is a lot better than no meeting at all.
Hmm.
So what we did is that we started experimenting during the lockdowns with running group rituals online. And we found that there were some things that worked, some things that didn't work so well, some things that work just as well as they do in the same room. So, okay, that's great. So we started getting interest from people in other countries than we'd ever dealt with before. We'd had sporadic interest from countries outside of Western Europe and
Yeah.
the Americas, but we hadn't had much. We hadn't had enough interest for it to gel into groups in outside of those areas. And then we started to find that there was so much interest in the online work that people would actually want to turn up to in-person meetings at the first available opportunity after the lockdowns ended.
Mm.
So we had a surge of enthusiastic new members from countries we'd never had much to do with before. So the IoT experienced an enormous growth surge,
Wow.
has been experiencing an enormous growth surge in the 20s.
Mm. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember when I joined Peter Carroll, it was actually the night I joined, it said that uh, that the Illuminates of Thanateros would be to the 21st century what the Golden Dawn was to the 20th century. And I know he's written that as well in various places. So this is obviously something that he fully believed. And I think from one perspective, you could say, oh, well, that's not really true because you can go and join the Golden Dawn or the OTO or the Martinists or, 100 other the builders of the Editum or 100 other groups, and how could it be have that same sort of monopoly as the Golden Dawn and the OTO really did, and Wicca. But on the other hand, it seems to be not inaccurate with, I'm not going to mention the name because they're kind of controversial, but a South African sort of hip hop band, adopting the chaos symbolism and chaos magic, and there's another band called Thanateros. I think it's a death metal band, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's and it seems it's showing up a lot in popular culture, and And as you say, younger people are definitely sort of gravitating to it, among other things. But it does seem to sort of shaped popular culture to a certain degree, and shaped the occult world more than I think would have been the most people would have predicted in say 1990,
Yeah.
1991.
I mean, I think the Golden Dawn, I mean, it was enormously culturally influential
Yeah,
um, in a very secret sort of way because it
yeah,
was a Masonic style organization. Well, it was more like co-masonry because they had women as well, but it
yeah,
was like it had that sort of very hermetic structure.
yeah,
And but it was nonetheless culture. You know, you do see cultural artifacts from the early 20th century, stories and so forth, obviously influenced by the Golden Dawn. But it
yeah.
only existed for like 8 years or something, didn't it? So 1993
Yes,
to sorry, 1893
yeah,
to
something like that. That's
1991,
right.
something like that. And
Yeah,
I mean, the IoT has already been on the go since what? Well, nominally 1978. So
yeah,
we're approaching 50 years.
right.
Um, and I think the cultural influence has been gigantically greater than that of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, even I think there were about 7 or 8 people, definitely 7 or 8 members of the temple I was in, and I think I calculated five of us are now published authors, and two were musicians. You know who they are. And so out of 8 people, 7 people have had some kind of impact on the culture to varying degrees, which I don't think you could look at many temples of many occult orders today and find that out of 8 people, two were musicians and five were published authors on the occult. And it would almost be it would probably be an exception, I think. So you know, even if that was sort of a little bit overrepresented, I mean, over the decades, certainly IoT and chaos magicians must have had a, very significant effect.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. I think the picture you just drew of the temple you joined, where so many people were, well, creative. They were
Yeah,
actually
that's right.
producing stuff. I think
Yeah,
we still have that to some extent. I think our particular kind of magic attracts people who want to do their own thing.
yeah,
So they're likely to be artists, musicians, writers, filmmakers, and so forth. Not all of
yeah,
them, of course. We have people in professions. We have in medical profession, legal profession. We have people who obviously don't want their names out there. So that's a very hermetic side to it. They just don't want to be known for
yeah.
doing weird stuff.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
nonetheless, the influence is there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. So tell us a little bit about your. I know you have to go soon, but tell us a little bit about your books, Primordial Chaos, and your upcoming memoir and your more literary side.
Okay. Well, we've mentioned a few of the main things about Primordial Chaos, and for years I've
Yeah,
been toying with the idea of reissuing some of my old articles, and so I kind of like got all the texts from that I'd sent into Chaos International. That was kind of starting
yeah,
point, and I thought there was a couple of things I did before that, but only a couple that I'd written for Lamp of Thoth. Chris
right.
Bill's in-house magazine for the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was like my first time in print. Really, was writing an
Yeah,
article for them
yeah.
back in 1979 or whatever. But
Mm,
yeah, then there was the Chaos International stuff, and then there was various other things I'd written for, and then it was all sort of on the back burner for years. And then a few years ago, I thought, just a minute, there's actually much more than this. There's all the material I've written about, or the material I've been involved in terms of public rituals, public facing rituals or events or talks about magic,
mm,
where the public were invited. It wasn't just an internal thing, so it's not it's not secret. And then there's all the stuff about psychedelics and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, I'll lump all that together, and I've actually got a reasonable sized book, particularly with a few reflections on how things have changed since.
yeah,
So that was the prompt. for producing Primordial Chaos. And when I put it all together, I thought, oh, this is actually, quite a decent book. At first, I thought it might be just sort of just a booklet that would at least get my old stuff out there again. But no, it
Right.
was more than that. It was a book with, and it was fun to write. It was fun to think back along those timelines and see, because I mean, you've got to disagree with your own past self, haven't you? Or you haven't moved on.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's Ian Reid once said to me something like, it's footprints in the sand. It's time is footprints in the sand. The sea's washing them away. You got to
Yeah.
keep moving. So you got that sort of element of it appealed to me. And while I was writing that stuff up, I started to think, no, the memoir book I'd been toying with, some sort of autobiographical memoir book I've been toying with for years in the form of writing like tiny little files and saving them onto the computer, started to become more of a reality as I was writing the reflective and historical parts of
Yeah.
Primordial Chaos.
Yeah.
So I ended up with, by the time I started putting the memoir together, which was kind of around the end of last year, I got about 500 tiny files, some of which were just one sentence. And it was just something I'd remembered from the past that seemed significant. So I then had to organize those kind of semi chronologically into sort of like, this is me as a kid up to age 18. This is me when I was a young stoner in the academic world. This is me as a novice magician. This is me as a more mature magician. And this is the more recent stuff. 5 eras of my life, basically. And I started to organize those 500 tiny files into narratives. And
Yeah.
that they were the seeds for what's now becoming the memoir, which is certainly take. I mean, it's looking at the moment like it's going to be enormous. I think I'm going to trim it down. I'm to about 70,000 words, and I've only
Yeah.
got to about I've only got to about my early 30s.
Oh, wow.
But I think it's going to be trimmed down a bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's going to quite a substantial memoir, I think. And like we were saying earlier on, it'd be something that will give an idea of cultural continuity for people in the future.
Yeah, that's right, and that's important. Well, we mentioned the Rune Guild and runes, and of course, Odin has two ravens, and one of them representing memory. And I think that memory in this day and age that we live in is undervalued, whether,
Definitely.
memorization is laughed at,
Yeah.
considered to be bad, and or cultural memory is bad. We're constantly looking to the future, but have no idea where we're going, and consequently, it just swept up in the tide, which is very dangerous. I'm glad that you are writing your memoir and preserving this memory for us and future generations.
During my recent dealings with Pete Carroll, when he invited me to contribute to his Chaos International book, and I declined because I don't
Mm,
think it's not his brand. It wasn't his brand really, so I
mm,
declined that. But we had an interesting discussion. One thing I agreed with him about was when he said, and I said I'm writing a memoir by the way, and he said I expect part of the motivation for that is so that there'll be something more permanent than the internet left, than the articles on the internet
yeah,
left at the end of your
yeah,
life. And I thought, because I think his phrase was something like, well, not long after, or either during our lifetimes or not long after our lifetimes, 80% of everything we've written will disappear from the internet
yeah,
and everything we've been. I think that may well be right. Everything
yeah,
just gets splurged out by the great splurge. And
yeah,
this has become worse with AI because AI just lies all the time. So it just makes shit up,
yeah.
badly, and oversimplifies and makes the wrong connections. And so everything just gets distorted and degraded.
Mm,
So yeah, we agreed about that. So I think it's important to actually tell the story of the past and put it into a paper book
yeah,
so that people can have this book on their shelves and pass it down to their kids or their
yeah.
neighbours or whatever.
Yes, yes, definitely. Well, let people know where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up copies of your books.
Well, um, I think you've probably got my Linktree address. which is all my sort of book
Okay.
URLs and my website and all of those things. And so all that stuff's on there. And that's where that's the starting point for looking at any of my public facing stuff. The most of my book, well, my books are all published by different people. Actually, there's quite a spread. Some of them are published by other people. Some of them are self-published, and so on. And there's more than one publisher has dealt with them. So
Yeah.
that's all there on the link tree. The memoir, I don't know who will be publishing it yet. I'm trying to find a publisher for that rather than self-publish because I want it to get out to more people. So I think
Yeah.
it might be the most important thing I'll ever have written when I've
Right.
finished it. So I do want it to
Yeah.
get out as far as possible. So I don't know where that's going to be available next. But all of that news will be in my newsletter or it will be on my website and those things will be findable. I mean, I hardly ever use social media these days. I use Blue Sky, and that's about it. Um, and most of what I used to do on social media, I do what I used to do before that, which is on my blog or on my newsletter, which goes out about between 4 and 6 times a year. Um, so that's just that's kind of like updates about what I'm doing and where my stuff can be found.
Great. Well, I'll certainly post links as well so that people can get a hold of you. But it's been great speaking with you. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I've enjoyed it. Cheers, I enjoyed it.
Excellent.